I was somewhat surprised when we reviewed all the case materials and you guys only applied for a systems loss permit. Given that you are a diverter, you're generating revenue from, no one owns the water, it's owned by the state, but you're generating revenue from moving that water. So can you just talk me through that logic? Why only apply for a systems loss permit, and why should the commission grant any systems loss, knowing that water is such a precious resource?
We're not a typical end user in the way that an agricultural operation is or a taro farmer. If we are the diverter, our obligation is to operate the system, and all systems have a system loss. No matter how closed or open the system is, there's going to be some loss. So the hearings officer in our discussions through this contested case was very clear that Wailuku Water only needs a permit for its system losses. And that came out to about 2.7 million gallons per day.
Do you folks have different requirements to deliver water to people that have pertinent rights versus someone that has paid you financially to deliver them water?
Great question.
That's a little bit of a legal question.
Pertinent, actually, it's an excellent question, because let's assume we will be before the Public Utilities Commission, because we're there now. We've been there since 2009, and Avery has not been able to take on a new customer for over 10 years. That's part of the PUC requirements on them now. So even the new users now that you may give water to, we are not able to serve until we're finished with the Public Utilities Commission. And if that's an appurtenant right user and it's not an existing user, we might have to go and ask for an exception to the prohibition that exists right now. But Wailuku has contracts with people, entities and individuals to deliver to them. It fulfills those contracts. Now, how basically an appurtenant right person, if that individual is using the property now and is an existing use, Avery can serve that person. If it's not an existing use, he can't serve that person now because of the PUC order on him.
But in any case, some tariff will be established to the PUC. And any user off of our private system is going to be subject to that tariff.
That they're not subject to now.
That they may not be subject to now. Traditionally, we have supplied water to certain users. But now that we're a quasi-public utility and are required to open the docket and get a certificate of need and necessity, there will be a public hearing process, and there'll be ones who advocate that they should get water for free, or ones that get water at some reduced rate. But the PUC will determine, is there a tariff or a rate that everyone has to share in to continue to operate that private system.
I guess what I'm struggling with as a commissioner over, as a trustee really over our state's water resources, is that, and Mr. Mancini's comments about changing the IIFS and needing further reports. The status quo that was set by the commission is essentially has allowed water to be diverted out of streams since 1987 until this our mediated agreement. Now, in some ways, that means that water is allowed to be continuously diverted, right? And yet we have all of these people that have pertinent rights, that have historical rights to water, traditional customary access and rights to water, that you're essentially saying we're not sure if they have the same level of requirements to be delivered water as people that you have private contracts with. And yet, no one owns the water, right? But our commission has allowed it essentially to be diverted, and you folks are allocating it, and don't seem to be holding responsibility for delivery to people with pertinent rights, or aren't giving me enough things in the record to know that these rights will be taken care of in a future situation. And I'm just trying to reconcile that, right? none of us, you folks didn't build the great system that was built 100 somewhat years ago. We've all inherited this problem to a certain extent. But I'm wondering, how do we rectify it?
I think your question is an excellent question, and that's one of the reasons I was saying you need a comprehensive set of rules to deal with these, with the users off of these streams, and basically to deal with how we would be able to get water to users who basically have no access to the ditch system at this point in time. Because that's one of the areas. There are those that have no access to the ditch system at this time. Wailuku obviously wants more users. We've been limited for 10 years with the existing user base. And it's not like we would not want to serve everybody who wants to be served. It's the access to the ditches for parties to do it. And that wasn't dealt with in the implementation program whatsoever. But you're bringing up an excellent question, and I'm not sure that there's a clear answer that you want to the question right now. It's a complex problem, and it's part of the implementation that I'm extremely worried about.
Sure. And I'm just wanting to get a chance for you folks to comment on this, because our commission will decide, right? And of course, we'll go forward from there. But I am truthfully struggling with these issues.
I am.
Can you share your investment record in terms of investing in infrastructure improvements that would mitigate system losses?
Commissioner, I didn't bring any of that historical information, but
What kinds of things did you do?
Just, before the last real study that the plantation did was called the Brandt study, and I think that was in about 1984 or so. And that was a undertaking of an evaluation of the entire system to determine how much loss there was in the system and where improvements could be made. So from that period, 1984 forward, there were incremental changes and improvements made in the system. One specific example would be when we got into the contested case, there were questions raised about why we had 15 reservoirs on the system, and that we had losses of percolation and evaporation through these reservoirs. So over time, we eliminated a number of those down to where we only have 8 now. There's been repairs in diversion weirs or within trestles, in earthen banks where there may have been leaks. So there was a series of things made improvement-wise over time. From a financial standpoint, I think it's important to note that in the last 12 years, and I know Commissioner Buck had asked some of the financial aspects of this, in the last 12 years, Wailuku Water Company has lost, and there's a lot of claim that we're making a lot of profit, we're profiting as a corporation. Since 2007 through 2018, our P&L reported loss is $2,549,702. So we are not making money. We've actually burned through any cash reserves that we've had. And in 2018, in early March, we sold about 4,200 acres of fee simple land in order to generate cash to be able to continue to operate. So we're at a financial point where I'm not sure how much longer we can continue to do this at the revenue base that we have right now. It's just financially not working. Had I had adequate cash reserves, maybe we would have made more investments into infrastructure, or deferred maintenance would have been taken care of better. But with not having a lot of cash, I couldn't do it.
So it's hard to hold out a lot of hope there's going to be improvements in system losses. There'll be continuing deterioration of those systems, and therefore greater system losses as we go forward.
I think that we've made system improvements to eliminate as much loss as we can without a substantial investment. Substantial investment would be things like lining the ditches or taking
Like
more
piping.
reservoirs off. But then you're talking about millions of dollars to be able to line ditches. This system was built in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. It's an open system that only functions with a certain volume and flow of water going through it. It's not as if I can control by valve shutting on or off at one point. So it's unique, and I think that's a lot of what the community doesn't understand is how the system works and what it takes to function.
Having, in a prior life, managed a few of those systems and invested in them too, to pipe them all the way, recognizing that we earned a return over the last 100 years, but we now have to invest in them if they're going to support us for the next 100. At some point, an investment has to be made.
I think we're in a very transformational period. We're moving out of a plantation era system to a permit allocated system. And yes, over time, those improvements are going to have to be made. But if Wailuku Water Company, as the diverter, doesn't have the stream of revenue to invest to make those improvements, then there's no way we can do it. And that goes back to getting back before the PUC and establishing some tariff, some rate that all the users are going to have to pay, which contribute revenue to improve the system to continue to get water. It's about reliability and dependability.
Secondly, can you address the issue about dumping of Waihe ditch water into Wailuku Stream?
Thank you. Sorry.
It kind of goes to the point of the open system. You've got a very complex system, and let me just give you a few facts. The Waihe, this was when the system was originally built, not today, but when it was originally built. The Waihe system has 10.8 miles of ditches, 18 tunnels, 2 intakes, and a build capacity of 60 million gallons. That's just the Waihe system. The Spreckles system has 3.9 miles of ditches, 4 tunnels, 1 intake with a capacity build of 30 million. The Waiau system has 1.6 miles of ditches, 1 intake, and a build capacity of 10 million gallons. Now, we haven't used the Waiau system for probably 7 years or more. And we had to shut it down basically because of vandalism. People were going up and vandalizing the intake, and the cost to go in and repair it or bring it back online just wasn't worth the small amount of water that we were getting out of that system. The Waikapu system has 2.4 miles of ditches, 3 tunnels, 4 original intakes, of only which 1 is working now, and a build capacity of 26 million gallons. So when the plantation built the system back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was built and meant to take all the water and to use all the water on the sugar fields and use it on a daily basis without having any surplus. So when you take water in the far north end in Waihe and you're sending it down system, you're going down, up to almost maybe 20 miles of ditches over the different systems. To be able to control the flow based on diversions with stream flows with head pressure, which increase the volume going into the ditch, and then managing that between the users who, for the most part, are not giving us forecasts of what they're going to need. Not even the Kuleanas give us any kind of forecast of what they use. The Kuleanas get the first take off of the Waihe system, and they're getting about 3.6 million gallons, roughly. These were some numbers that were done several years ago. But total deliveries on the Kuleana users is somewhere over 6 million gallons of water a day. So we don't get any information from them on what they need or want or what they can take. We get little information from many of the users who we deliver water to on what their demands and needs are. So we're trying to balance the best we can based on history of what we're diverting, what's going through the system, so that when the water comes from the various sources into the delivery ditches, at the end, there's very little left. Now, that doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes there's excess water. And it's not dumping water, it's releasing water. That's calculated as part of the system loss. When you have an open system without a valve to control on and off, you're gonna have loss and you're gonna have release. So it's a balance of, and circumstances happen. For example, the golf course recently shut down its supply reservoir. And they were taking about 1 million gallons of water. On September 24th, I got notice from the golf course that that reservoir is going to be offline for 3 to 4 weeks. So during that period, we were trying to balance the fact that they were not taking water for irrigation, but we still had flows through the ditch. You have to maintain a certain volume through the entire system to make it work. If you don't, the system becomes dysfunctional, and somebody along the line is not going to get water. So it goes back to the balance. Another unusual circumstance that created some release increases was the fish ladder. We were asked to try to divert as much as we could out of the Wailuku River during installation time. So we did, and that excess water that came out of Wailuku went into Reservoir 10. Reservoir 10 holds a capacity, I think, of about 8 to 10 million gallons. Anything over that drops into a ditch that goes into Waihee Ditch. It's an overflow ditch. So the excess water that we were taking out of Wailuku to accommodate the request was going into Waihee Ditch, which then had to be released back somewhere. If it gets to the terminus reservoir, number 9, at the very far south end of the system, and the reservoir is full, and I think that one only holds about 6 million gallons of water, at some point, water is going to go somewhere. So we make a choice to release some of the water to balance the system back into what we call Oki Gate, which is at Wailuku Stream. That's the last stream that we have on the system to be able to put surface water back into a stream versus down, say, a gulch or somewhere else, or a reservoir where it overtops. So it's complicated. It's a balance of demands and the daily diversions and the flows.
So your response suggests that more communication between all the parties would improve matters. It would cause less erosion of social capital and that kind of community friction, as well as less loss of the resource. And I'm trying to square that with your earlier comment that our delegation of these implementation issues to private parties, and you're all private parties, is inappropriate at the commission level, especially at this inflection point when it's hard to set rules for kind of a future that we're all trying to figure out what that future looks like. Why not have an expectation that you folks would all work together and reach the kinds of agreement that Mahipono and Earth Justice and OHA reached earlier, that kind of leads to better communication, better system management, and better resource use?
I think there's a difference in two categories here. My concern is making discretionary decisions as to how proration should go between, say, category 1 and category 2. Those are discretionary situations, and that's difficult for someone to make without standards. How do we do that? It's the discretionary standards, the discretionary decisions without standards that basically create a serious problem, because everybody's going to be pointing fingers on it, and you're going to have competing interests going on. And do we favor one over another? Would we like to see Mr. Saracen get more water? Obviously we would. We would. How do we get it to him? That's problematic. It's very, very difficult under the system. My problem is delegating to a private party obligations of the institution. The institution has to declare water shortages. The institution has to create a plan. The institution has to basically create the priorities and has to create the apportionment. And it has to do it. That's your charge. That's your charge to do it. That's the point I was trying to make.
Out of context, in 1984, what was the total amount of water delivered to Tapa Plantation?
To which plantation?
Well, look, in the system, you sort of rounded out numbers of,
Yeah.
60, 20, 10, 3, 6. And I assume that the sum of all of those was the total water available.
You'd have to go back earlier than 1984, because during that 84, 85, 86 period, Wailuku Sugar was already phasing out of sugar. So if you go back to, say, 1960s and 1970s.
I'll take 84. I mean, and what is it today? What is the total capacity of water being taken in at Wailuku Water Company? All in, that you have available for its users.
Well, to start off, we're required to leave 25 million in the streams.
Well, I mean,
that's the IIFS.
That's part of the total
Okay.
available.
So if it's at Q50, now here's a qualification that we gotta realize. The numbers that the hearings officer used were from USGS studies from 1982 to 2002. I think it was 2005, 1984 to 2005, a 22-year period. Things have changed in that last 15 years.
I guess that's my whole point,
Yeah.
is that at some point in time, when there was a need to maximize total resources, they went and got it. Since that time to today, there's been a degradation, because really, there was no payback for that. And the sense that I'm trying to get at is that as we look forward, what is a potential that we can look at to help our communities grow? Then we can look at what kind of investments that we need to make to help restore, recapture, and properly deliver these resources to everyone who needs them. And that's what I'm trying to get a sense at here. And as Paul adequately says, that we need to have a sense of how you want to approach that in the rulemaking or the methodology, basically. And I'm trying to get a feel for what is that potential apple that we're looking at, and then where the low-hanging fruit would be. And I think this is a nice system, Avery, because you've been managing it and you've had experience with it. And again, you know, today is a shadow of what it was probably 1984, which is probably a shadow of what it was in 1964. Just help us look at the long-range potential and what kind of intellectual capital we need to invest before we look for financial resources.
I think, Commissioner, as I said earlier, the tail is chasing the dog. In the DNO, the hearings officer intends to allocate out about 39 million gallons of water. I don't believe there's 39 million gallons of water available. Not in today's situation. Now, there's going to be high flows, and there's going to be times where there's extremely low flows. In this year alone, the first 2 or 3 months, we had decent flows in Wailuku River and Waihe. From the last 7 months forward, we've had probably close to Q100 numbers in Wailuku River. Q100 numbers under this 22-year study was 7.1 million gallons. I think my feeling, without having gauges that gave us the accurate number, we were maybe between 8 to 10 million at best. So there's going to be times when there's very low flows. And I think we're in that right now. We're in a drought, no question about it.
Avery, you were just about to, I'm interested in following up on Wayne's question. The total amount that Wailuku Water, I mean, just a running average, monthly, yearly, how much water are you guys moving today? Yeah.
I'd say that we're only moving in the neighborhood of 17 to 24 at best right now. Back in the 70s and the 60s, before the 80 sugar phase out, we may have been running 60 to 70 million gallons of water a day.
And is that metered right now?
None of it's metered.
None of it's metered,
Yeah.
okay.
But it's measured either by weirs or staff plates. There's a monthly reporting obligation of the diverted quantity that I supply to the Water Commission.
Okay. Thank you very much.
We are dismissed.
What was the answer to the Ingrid question?
Brian, you're, well, there was 140 lots and they were 2 acres each, so there's 280 acres plus and minus for roads. So it's probably 287 acres, if I remember right. Okay.
If I may. All right, just to clarify the record, commissioners, so the entire Wailuku Country Estate subdivision is comprised of 207 lots over 470 acres. The 184 owner lots comprise 420.7 acres. And just to be sure it's clear on the record, the existing use was claimed on 98.75 acres, and the new uses were claimed over 220.5.
That means only 8%.
I'm sorry?
That means only 8%.
Current. At the time of the application.